Now, what those myths explain so far are a couple of things. One of them is that human beings who die without violence, although Umwim was killed, so that's almost kind of a break of the rules, but human beings who don't become momoyok instead become ghosts. They become bagel, they go to live in the land of the dead where the other dead are, and so on. There's a little more to it than that. The maggots from Umwim's head, he actually meant them as a gift. They weren't maggots. They were small giddy shells, the kind that Telefolmin used for bride wealth and mortuary payments. And he meant to provide the source of that to people at Telefolmin. But because he was ashamed, he said, okay, you're going to have to walk down now and trade for these things. You're not going to be able to get them on your own. So there's going to be more work involved. There's a third alternative when people die. One alternative is if it's violent, they become a moyok, or they become ghosts in the land of the dead. The third alternative is they can become spirits in the spirit house. And that's only available to men who are initiated and who die peaceful deaths. Okay? But if that's the case, traditional telephone burials, people were put on exposure platforms, and the corpse was allowed to rot. So the flesh and the blood and all that stuff would fall down into an old garden. That garden then had to be abandoned, but the bones are still there. So the bones, if they were good at something, if they weren't good at anything, you just let the platform collapse, the bones go down, and pigs will eat them or something. Nobody cares about the bones. But if this was a particularly good hunter or a good taro gardener or just somebody who knew really good things to do, who was skilled, you wanted that person's help. And so you take the bones, you take them in very soft leaves, you cradle them, and you would first thing you would do is you would anoint them with red ochre, okay, red pigment from the ground, which actually originates from affects menstrual blood. So they get the blood restored, they're painted with this red color, and then they're put into net bags, which hang on the back wall of the spirit house, the Telefolmin, or in the small village spirit houses where they are, and they watch over the village. And there are two kinds. There's a taro kind and the arrow kind. If it was a good hunter, he'll be an arrow bag. If it was a good gardener, he'll be a taro bag. Okay. And one of the rules about that is that they will stay there as long as they're happy. Their spirits will stay there as long as they're happy. They'll help you as long as they're happy. If they're not happy, they could mess things up, but more often they'll just say, okay, I'm going to go off to Bagala. I'm going to go to the land of the dead. These people don't look after me. I'll go and see my relatives down there. And now all you have is a bunch of inert bones. There's nothing there, no spirit, just dead bones. There's nothing at all. So you have to keep them happy. It's not a hard thing to do. One of the things that's important is because they're old men to begin with, they have bones and no flesh, they're very susceptible to cold. They don't like being cold. So you always have to keep a fire going in the spirit house to keep them warm. They don't like being alone. They're there because you wanted to bring them back. But if you wanted them back, then maybe you should talk to them every once in a while, or just pay them some attention, be polite and that kind of thing. And if you do, they'll stay. And if you don't, they won't. If some pork has been killed or some special food has become available, you might drop a little piece into the net bag for them. okay, to keep them happy. It doesn't have to be a big thing, just keeping them in mind. Keeping them in mind. If the spirit, and the name for these spirits is the song, if the song doesn't help, if no matter what you do, your gardens don't prosper, or if no matter what you do, you can't find game, you fire them, you chuck them out, and that's it. They're gone. You don't have to worry about anything. The bones are gone. That's the end of it. So there are three ways, three places for the dead to be. One of them is be a bunch of bats and coming out and eat bananas at night, or they can go off live underground in caves underground in the land of the dead, or they can stay and live in the village with their families and be there in the spirit house. And that's why every village should have a spirit house. And without one, the dead are lonely. They have nothing to do there. They're not going to hang around, and you don't get any help at all. So that was one of the reasons to have a spirit house. And the most important spirit house of all was the one at Telefolmin, which was like many, many, many times larger than any of the others, and was the anchor for the whole thing. And all the senior initiations had to be there. So that's an important kind of thing. Now, the problem we know about this with the Yamin is that if you destroy that house or interfere with it in some way, you're threatening the entire region. What happened at Telefolmin after I left, and what happened in Telefolmin after I left, is something that was pretty scary from the point of view of the people there. And it came to me in the form of a letter from Wesani, the first guy who met me when he brought me down to the village, gave me this long lecture about, don't mess with any women. He was the member of parliament for the area now, and he was concerned about something. And he said, what is happening is that there's something that people call revival. And it sounds like English revival, but it was pronounced with the word Bible in it. Revival that started off at the Baptist Bible School in Duranmin, outside of Telefol territory. And this movement had spirit mediums, had women who the Holy Spirit would speak through and go around and travel to various villages and say they had to get rid of their spirit house. Jesus didn't want this. God didn't want this. And the spirit houses had to go. And already many of them had been emptied of their bones and just either torn down or used as regular houses. And the plan was they wanted to take the central spirit house at Telefolmin, because what God wanted was for Telefolmin to be Christian. And that was the deal. That was the story. And he said, this is very hard. What was going on is the people from Telefolmin, where the big spirit house was, they let it be known that if anybody crossed a creek that's kind of the boundary line between their village and the more open area, they would be facing arrows. They showed up with their bows and arrows and said, this is going to be war. You don't touch this. You don't come here. But he was worried for all kinds of things. And one of the things he was worried about was that all the stories they had were going to be lost. And he said he wanted me to come back and to go and talk to people in these villages, not to change their mind about revival or anything else, but just to record whatever stories these old guys wanted to pass on and make sure that they got passed on to them. So this happened in 1978. Okay, that was 3 years after independence, and also 3 years after I left the field. I had just started teaching at that time, but I had managed to get, I was able to get some funding in the summer to go off and return to Telefolmin again to collect this Wengamim, this sacred lore, and find out what was going on. Now, when I look back at it in retrospect, I probably should have seen some of that coming. The revival, the way it happened, it started off, there's a second mining site. Oktedi is the mining site at Tabouville, where they were searching for copper and gold. And to the north of Telefolmin, there's a place called Nanataman, or Frida, otherwise known as the Frida Mine, along the Frida River. And there are mineral deposits there. In fact, the mountains around Telefolmin are full of all kinds of minerals. And there was a mining camp set up there. They were doing drill pads, making clearances, drilling into the earth. And they had a number of telephone employees that they had hired from the valleys that previously were occupied by the Iligamine that they exterminated. And they hired these guys, and they weren't being treated very well by the mining company. They asked, among other things, if they could, it was be possible for their relatives to get medical treatment at the mining camp if they were sick, because medical facilities weren't very good in the bush. They wanted to know if it was possible to arrange for flights on the airstrip in and out of the area. And perhaps as important as anything else is some of the ones who were actually relatively well educated, had been through a school, and many of them spoke a little bit of English, said, what are the possibilities for further training and to get more responsible employment here? And the manager at the mining camp insulted him, said, you guys are rockheads. You don't have any you don't have any ability to do this stuff. You do what we tell you and that's it. The result is they went on strike. You don't want to have a strike at a bush station, right? They went on strike, and to underscore the point, they didn't just down their tools, they walked away from the site. So that site was left without its workforce. And they walked to the Bible school at Turanmin. And that's where these women were having encounters with the Holy Spirit. And these guys then accompanied them back into the home villages they came from. And so the story goes, there were 12 women. This is an interesting number for Christians. There were 12 women who were mediums of the Holy Spirit, through which the Holy Spirit would speak and would let Telefolmin know what plans God had for them, what they wanted to do. And they would go into speaking in tongues and trances and so on, and say what was going to happen, what they didn't have to worry about, what they did have to worry about. Not only did I record the stories of the men's cult, but at one of the villages I had gone to, I had run across a seance. I was trying to go to sleep at night. We're sitting in a house at this village, and we heard strange noises coming from one of the neighboring houses. And it turns out it was a woman who was possessed by the Holy Spirit at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I went over, and both, tried to talk to her, look at her, and she was in her trance. She gave in Papisan and a bit of English, a bit of a rundown what the Bible said, what there were Adam and Eve, they were created. There was Jesus, he was born. There were the disciples, here's what happened. And then she went into a kind of talk that was part telephone, and then something that wasn't intelligible, but she was very, very excited, very agitated. She was trembling and shaking, and the whole house was shaking at the time. Her breath was coming in fits. And that was the Holy Spirit there. And that was one of the ways that the truth of what she was saying could be guaranteed, because this wasn't her talking, this was somebody else. And it was an important message for you. These women, they met skepticism, but in a number of ways they carried the day. And one of the ways in which they carried the day is they would start trembling, and somebody would say, hey, knock it off, and put their hand on them to get them to stop trembling. They'd start trembling too. All of a sudden you'd have 5 or 6 people around trembling and shaking. And that was the proof that the Holy Spirit was there. So those villages, their men's houses, their spirit houses, were emptied of their relics. They were gone. The relics were either just thrown away in the bush or buried, but one way or another they were gone. And they started building churches instead. And the Holy Spirit explained that what God had in mind is that men and women should be together in church. All these rules that the ancestors taught them about, men can't eat this, women can't eat that, that's all nonsense. And to prove it, I'm going to eat some of this stuff and see if anything happens. Nothing happened. You can eat if you want. You don't have to, but if you want, you can eat your own pig. That's all right. So they, one by one, the spirit houses in different villages were dismantled or gone. And they started converging on Telefolmin. And the people at Telefolmin said, not going to happen. They had allies from a neighboring village, Kupranmin, not going to happen. And so it was a very precarious situation, very tense situation. But it was one in which not just the fate of the spirit house, of course, was at stake, but who Telefolmin were as a people and how they were going to be living their lives from that point on. It was, for a lot of people, it was traumatic. For other people, it was a breath of fresh air. But it was one of those kinds of things that was very, very difficult to go back from. We were going to come back from that. It was kind of a one-way street. They did stay away they didn't attack the spirit house at Telefolmin. There was a kind of tacit agreement. Okay, we'll leave that alone. You guys are okay. This is okay. But, we're still going to have our churches and that kind of thing. And what occurred to me is I'd already seen some of that before I had left my previous field work. They had had outbreaks of what the medical health officer, district health officer called contagious hysteria at the nurses' training school on the Baptist mission. And they behaved very, very much as these spirit Marys did, except they didn't say they were being possessed by a spirit. They just had outbreaks where they would become trembling and they'd become shaking. And they displayed aggression towards their relatives, and in particular towards fathers and brothers. And normally it would pass after a while. It would go away and they didn't have recurrences, but it really shook everybody up. I didn't pay attention to it because I thought, well, this is a problem with the nurses' training school and that kind of thing. But the stuff that was being modeled there showed up again with the spirit Marys, the ones who were the mediums of the Holy Spirit. There was one other clue before I left that I thought was interesting, and I wrote about a little bit, but I didn't take very seriously. There was a very talented teenage schoolboy, high school boy, who began having fits of unconsciousness where he'd fall to the ground. And another voice would speak through him. And when he woke up again, came out of it, he explained that this was one of his childhood friends who had died as a child and gone off to the land of the dead. And this child would come and speak through him. And he got this talent by walking around the mountains where bush spirits abound. And one of the bush spirits struck him. And so he would go up there in the mountains as high as he could and hope that something would happen. He'd be knocked unconscious, come back. And he developed a talent for going into trance at will. And people were very interested in that because he could see what was going on in the land of the dead. And they'd say, well, is my uncle so-and-so there? He says, yeah, he's doing there. Well, what's their life like? Oh, well, they have cotton clothes like you and I do. Some of them have wristwatches that use steel tools, their cars down there, that kind of thing. They just live sort of normal lives. That's what they're like down there, except it's a little cold, but that's where they are. And they say, well, did you see any of the Christians down there? I say, no, they're not there. And what the Christians said, of course they're not there. That's because they go to heaven. So now you have a bifurcation in the fates of the dead. Your parents, your grandparents, those who abided by the strictures of effects culture, go to the land of the dead. Christians who forsworn that, who don't want that, they go to heaven. Now, when you die, who do you want to be with? Do you want to be with your grandfather? You can go there. Or do you want to be with your wife and kids? That's the call you make. And it's a matter of conflicted loyalties. And not surprisingly, most men said, nope, I'm going to stick with my wife and kids. That's where I'm going. So that's pretty much what happened. And there were kind of precursors of that, but it didn't look like it was going anywhere. And when these women passed around the circuit, in a matter of months, it was a different picture. And as they said, I mean, there's no going back. You're not going to have exposure burials anymore. It was illegal anyway. The government says it's unsanitary to have all these rotting corpses around. You can't do that anyway. So that's the end of the relics. That's the end of the spirits for the spirit house. And that means we're into new things. And I compiled my archive. I delivered a copy of it to the library at UPNG. And I delivered a copy of it to the local government council at Telefolmin. That's their custody. They have that. That's there. And of course, I had a number of men that I hired as assistants, panned out with tape recorders and gathered things, then reconverged. That was how to make good with the time that we had. There was, for me, there was something really important and a new revelation, because before I left, they said, okay, now you know the secrets. We've told you about the secrets of the spirit house, but those are just the ones we tell the young guys. So come in, and this time it was in the big spirit house at Telefolmin. And what happened was there's a trap door in the floor. In fact, there are two trap doors, one for the taro side, one for the arrow side. And one of the trap doors was opened. There was a ladder going down. I was offered taro and something that's absolutely forbidden in a spirit house, which you cannot under any circumstance bring into a spirit house, is a marsupial, is possums. They're taboo. So what I was offered was a marsupial, a cooked marsupial, and roast taro, and take it down. And underneath that tall spirit house is another chamber. And under that chamber are bark sheets that to singing and chanting are stripped off and stripped off and stripped off and stripped off and stripped off. And at the bottom, guess who's there? Affect's skull is there. Okay. That's where she stays. And there's other stuff on there's a taro side and the arrow side. It's even better than that. It turns out not only are there trapdoors, there's a blind, there's a false wall on one side where there's a bit of a drop off in a ravine. For one of their biggest initiations, the fourth initiation, they performed a magical feat. And the magical feat was this. This is where you have people being initiated from 20 different villages. Okay, so you're talking about maybe a couple hundred guys. They emerge out of the spirit house as if by magic, but nobody sees them go inside. That's because there's this pathway along the side, and during the night they dismantle the blind. They go in underneath. They climb up the ladder, climb through the trapdoor, and they assemble, and then they emerge when they're ready to go. Okay. It was in the old days too. It served as a fortress house. So that was a really big deal thing. Probably the most important thing about all of these things is that they said, okay, now we're going to tell you about the house that really counts. There are three kinds of spirit houses. There's a young one there's a small one for young guys for the first junior initiations. There's the big one, the main one. And then there's a little one out back, which is for old guys, okay? And for the one that's for the old guys, when you go in, the first thing that you notice about it, there's something wrong. And what's wrong with it is there's only one hearth. Where's the arrow hearth? Where's the taro hearth? Where are these two sides that have to be kept apart? There aren't two sides. They're all there. And what's inside? Marsupials, possums, the things you're not allowed to bring in a spirit house. eat them there. The reason you're not supposed to bring them into the spirit house, that's what you use for a birth feast when a woman gives birth. And the little men's house is a replica of a woman's menstrual and birth hut. And that's where they go. And that's the secret. You don't find out until you've finished all your initiations. And they say, you see, that's pretty impressive, but this is what's going on. So that's the story. The big secret is all those secrets, well, those are stories. Those are stories. Okay, well, as I said, I did that. There was some fallout from that happened in another way. And the fallout is this. What kicked the ball was that strike at the Freedom Mining Camp. That's what got the ball rolling for this movement of revival people fanning out over the landscape. It turns out one of the issues that the government was interested in is whose rights are going to be secured if they do find minerals there. Who has rights to the land, to the subterranean minerals, to the wealth that's there? Who has expectations of the mining company? What expectations do they have? That's what that strike was about. And it sits, as luck would have it, right on a provincial boundary. And for some time, Telefolmin had been agitating for something they called the Min province. That's the province that includes all the Telefolmin people and all the descendants of Afek. One of the questions that the local government wanted to know is, are any of her descendants on the other side of that boundary? And if so, what does that mean about the rights they have? And what about those? Are there any of those other people this side of the boundary? What kind of rights do they have? So the short part of that story is I was commissioned to act as a consultant on who lives out in that area, because there hadn't been ethnographic surveys of that area. Who lives out in that area, what their rights and expectations are, how they're going to get along with each other, what happens if you have conflicting claims, that kind of thing. And they really wanted to try to get that settled out before any mining got going, because otherwise what they knew from previous experiences is they could be heading for trouble. So I spent a fair amount of the next 3 years doing consulting there, with reports that were filed with the district administration and a couple of them with the government, but they weren't part of public stuff in general. Ultimately, this led to something else, which I'll speak to in a next installment, which is to try to figure out how land ownership as a formal matter operates around the Freedom Mine north of Telefolmin, but that's a tale for another time.